Hello. Welcome to episode 2, season 2 of Once Upon a Naija.
Yes, I'm Evelyn.
And I'm Laura.
Welcome back. So today we are continuing on from last episode because we think there were some really interesting points to explore around the historical figure of Queen Amina. She was a woman, a royal woman of the north, and last episode we had recorded a review of the Netflix film that has come out around her character, and it was quite embellished. If we put it that way, it was quite embellished.
They put some salt and Maggi.
Yeah.
But the onion was not enough.
They made some interesting creative choices.
Yes.
In the film, which we delved into. So you can check out what we thought of the film in the last episode. But today we want to chat a bit more about, the role of women and powerful women in what is now modern day Nigeria around that time of Queen Amina, and just the impact of that, the legacy, how we view her, her impact on women today, etc. So I think coming on from that episode, and just thinking more about Queen Amina as a woman, one thing that I found really, really interesting was researching her a bit more. So on the BBC Africa website, they were running a series about women you should know, like women who changed the world.
Yes.
And you mentioned in the last episode that there are other powerful women around that region who had quite compelling reasons for going on the conquests, and who had taken on like military leadership.
Or they had a mission to their existence.
Yes.
Or the mission for their existence was clear, or the mission for the legendary was much clearer. The motive for their actions were much clearer than
So I think that to me, her mission and her reasons for waging war for 34 years is compelling enough, in that she wanted to, get more land, because that's not something that we necessarily critique with men.
Yeah.
That question doesn't really come up as much, whereas the other women you had spoken about, usually, for example, Yas and Tewa, it was because she was actually campaigning against slavery.
The British,
the British. So sometimes that feels as though there's a moral righteousness to the war she's going on, whereas with Queen Amina, it doesn't feel quite righteous what she's doing. And I wanted to pick up on that because there was a comment on a video that BBC Africa had produced that was going through all the women that we should know about in that region. And Queen Amina was one of those women. And in this same video clip, this animation, it had depicted Queen Amina as a woman that represented wisdom and the spirit of womanhood, right? A woman that is to be looked up to. But in the same video, it also highlighted that she went on war for 34 years and had gone around to each kingdom or, local area, and would marry a man in that area, have sex with him, and then the next day kill him so that he wouldn't be able to say that he had slept with Queen Amina. Now, this is one of the legends and myths of Queen Amina that nobody is quite sure actually happened. Mm-hmm. And I thought that's quite something to be known about. But then there was a comment underneath this video that stated, is this a woman that we should actually be revering and look up to? Mm-hmm. And I think that's a very valid question. And the reason why I think it's a valid question, and I found it interesting, and it challenged me to think more critically and soberly about this figure, is I feel as though so much of my view of history anyway is taken from is taken with a post-colonial lens. Mm-hmm. And for me, often I've viewed people who, historical figures prior to colonization, with almost rose tinted glasses. And I think a lot of figures who existed pre colonization tend to be viewed in that way. I can think of, for example, with like Mansa Musa. I remember when I first heard about him as a character, and I thought, wow, look how impressive he was, because he was an example of an African that had power, was like educated, wasn't enslaved. And I hadn't viewed his empire with any critique. But if I now look at, but actually, when I think of the word empire, typically my reaction is, ugh, that's awful, because I think of the British
Empire
is like unspoken, but yeah, I think of the British and I reject that. And I realized I'd not given that same criticism to figures like Mansa Musa or Queen Amina, and I think that's a interesting question that we have to ask ourselves, like, why should...
I guess because of where we find ourselves historically in the modern times, we are often on a journey of redemption. We're trying to redeem the irredeemable. So it's either we're trying to prove something of our own worth through the existence of these people. So you say, oh, we weren't always slaves. We had queens, and this was a woman who was a queen, and she had all of this, empire, all of these kingdoms, and this and that, and it makes us feel something. It kind of validates us in a way, and I think so. Sometimes that is the privilege that these historical figures have, that they are being reviewed and revered by people who have lived a certain historical, or who have gone through a certain historical existence, I don't know, whatever you want to call it. So yeah, they have that privilege. But yeah, you make an interesting point about her, a sort of person, and the kind of womanhood that she depicts, because even the fact that she never married and she never had children at a time like that, in a Hausa land, I believe she was a Muslim. She must have been a Muslim woman as well, ruling. Again, there was, she was a matriarchy, right? And there was something that was said. Was it in the film or generally about her, that no woman had ever sat on the throne of Zazzau? So she's meant to be this first woman who has taken this position. And I think sometimes it makes me think of the fact that women don't tend to be in position of power often. So the very time that you get that opportunity, the way we grab it, and sometimes what we do with it might be different to how those who are always in position of power will deal with power. So like in the previous episode, I mentioned how her father reigned with diplomacy and calm, and even her brother, we don't really know much about how he reigned and how he ruled. Again, I'm really doing a bit of projection here and just trying to concur certain reasons for why she might have been the way she was. It could be that, yeah, you don't really get many women doing this, so she really had to protect her position. She had to show that she was capable of ruling and protecting the people of Zazzau and the environs as well. So perhaps she over-sacrificed in a way, because in her bid to protect, she might have denied herself of certain pleasures. And so this whole legend of her marrying men and killing them the next day might just be people's curiosity as to what was her love life like. What did she, did she meet with men? Did she have sex? What was her sex life like? And when you're this queen who's portraying this courage and power, people will be curious about your life, and what tends to happen is a lot of things will be said, and whether they're true or not, but they have to fill in the gaps.
Yeah.
So, I have a question. When you think of her and the kind of woman that she was and the role she played, was she one of a kind? In the sense that, did women generally have authority? Because that was what it made me think about. What other women, was it just this one woman who was a queen for 34 years, and it was such an oddity? Because now, obviously, there was people, the different position of power and authority. You don't have to. It's not just about being a queen, but there's also many other positions that one could have in the community. And it's really interesting. It'll be interesting to know, like, was it just that she was this one of a kind woman, and generally, what was the position that women had in that society?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I don't think that she was a one of a kind woman. I mean, we spoken that there are other women from, communities across the continent who are powerful. I don't think she was a oddity or a unique character. And the reason why I say that is because there's probably a lot of women who were powerful that we don't even know about, because now that we live in a society that is dominated by the male voice and male power is privileged, so we don't even want to study about women in history. I don't think it's wise to say that she was the only kind of woman that was powerful at her time. I think that the question is, why don't we know more about powerful women at that time?
I think it's more just trying to understand because now we're always fighting for gender equality and trying to women to have more, because we know that African, and even in the West, there's a lot of patriarchy in terms of the relationship between men and women. But from my understanding of the time when Amina lived, was that women did have position. There wasn't this whole gender inequality. Like, men recognized the fact that a woman could have authority based on her age, based on maybe the family that she came from, based on a variety of factors. And actually, it wasn't until that area got colonized by the British that this whole...
No, I think patriarchy, as I suppose we know it today, was actually introduced even before the British came. I think that came with the establishment of Islam
Yeah.
in the region, and so the gender norms that Islam has, I think that's where the gender roles, as we know them today, have been
So you
established.
think that religion had a lot more to do with the establishment of gender roles and the dynamic between men and women?
Yeah.
And yeah, that's true. But like we said, given the fact that, because obviously Dan Fodio with this Sokoto Caliphate, because when Amina was queen, the whole Emirates thing was not really a thing. So it was when the Sokoto Caliphate was formed, and then all these other areas were conquered and stuff like that, and then they formed an emirate, and that was when, I guess, Islam kind of had more of a stronghold in the northern part of Nigeria. But I think but then even in Islam, I mean, I don't really know much about the roles of women and men in Islam, and I'm sure there is some sort of different dynamic. But when I was researching online, it was sort of the general consensus was that it wasn't until colonization happened that it became more prominent. So it wasn't the fact that it wasn't there before, it was there, but it became more sort of defined and more established and more ingrained that it was almost, there was no going back.
Right.
Basically. And I think in a sense, when I compare it to like other parts of the world, because there's one thing I've always said in that in Africa, I know that even like in the Yoruba kingdom, because I know all these places were their own kingdoms before it all became a country called Nigeria. Even in the Yoruba kingdom, when I look at, like, if you look at a royal household or when a king is put on a throne, the advisory board, that you, as you might call it, always had women in it.
Right. Yeah.
It wasn't just men. They had women representing the market women, or a woman who was representing a particular interest. But then you compare that to like perhaps what Britain or what the Western world was like at the same time, and you think actually this whole gender, fight for gender equality wasn't such a thing. It wasn't such a fight in Africa. Even though there might have been patriarchy, but there was a respect that was given to women. Women had their position and they had their roles, and there was a synergy, I would say, between men and women. And where the women had the legitimacy to assume power, there wasn't much of a struggle in giving them the power that they rightly deserved, either by virtue of their birth or by virtue of whatever it was, they had it, and there wasn't that struggle. So when the question is, was she one of a kind, I mean, I don't know of any other female queen in the Hausa land at that time, so I guess she was one of a kind.
Okay.
In her own region.
Okay. Yes, in Hausa land. Yeah.
In Hausa land, but in terms of worldwide, or within the geographical sphere that is now Nigeria, she wasn't even really. I mean, you have other female. There's Nana Asma, who was much later. She was much later in the historical time frame, so she was more in the 1800s. So she was Danfodia's daughter, and she was an activist for free education for girls. But then you have like Queen Moremi of Ile-Ife. I'm not quite sure what time she existed, but I'm not even sure if she actually did exist, because there's like a legend around her and what she was known for. But her existence is almost so real that there's actually like there are places named after her, and the OAU University in Nigeria has like a Moremi Hall, and she's well established. So whether she lived, whether she didn't, I don't really know. That could be something interesting to look into. So yeah, there were women, but there's not really that many that I can think of off the top of my head.
And why is that important to you? Why is that question interested you?
Well, it wasn't so much that it was interesting. I guess it was just in trying to figure out the position that Amina had, what made her so. Because if it wasn't important, I'm sure there were many other men who were fighting and who were claiming, who were claiming towns, but you don't really hear about them. So the fact that she was known about, and she's this woman that we're talking about today, is because there was something special about her, and that's why I posed that question of, was she one of a kind, or was it that there were other women doing the same thing in that area at her time of existence? So you look at her neighboring country and be like, oh yeah, there was this other queen who was also, fighting and had many victories and was leading like 20,000 soldiers. We don't know. So I guess that sort of that gives more of a vim to her person and to her achievements, really.
So I think we've spoken a little bit more about what we think of the legacy of Queen Amina and the role of powerful women in that region, and we just thought it was an interesting character and person to study and look at in more depth.
Yeah, and we just wanted to bring a bit more context around her and give her a bit more personality, because sometimes with the lack of resource that we have in terms of historical documentation of these people, there isn't really much, and so a lot of things is left to the figment of our imagination for us to bring them to life. And I hope that we've managed to do that in some way and give our own analysis of who we thought she was. But yeah, it's been interesting, and
we're gonna bring more interesting characters, questions and figures in the rest of the podcast of this season, so do stay tuned. We're really eager to interact with our listeners. You know what's interesting? I've been looking at the analytics and I've been looking at where we have listeners at the podcast. I know that there was somebody in Pakistan.
Really?
There's somebody in Bulgaria.
Wow.
So listeners in Pakistan, listeners in Bulgaria, we see you. We hear you. Well, you hear us.
You hear us. We see you. But yeah, do write to us, chat us up on our socials.
Well, don't chat us up, but chat to chat to us. Yeah.
But yeah, no, this has been great. Thank you guys for listening. As always, please do share, like, support our ministry. Help us to get Nigerian history out. We're trying to educate and entertain you guys, and we hope we're doing that for you. So thank you. Until next time.
Until next time.
I'm Lara.
And I'm Evelyn.
Cheers.
Bye.